6 months ago, at this exact moment, I was sitting in a Starbucks, sobbing, and writing my brother's eulogy. And today, I wanted to share the story of how I wrote the most difficult thing I've ever written in my life. I'll be honest, I was going back and forth on whether I wanted to do this video or not. Only because it's heavy subject matter and it's deeply personal. And I didn't really know if I wanted to confront this head on and certainly publicly. So bear with me as I try to figure out exactly how I'm going to do this, because I really don't have a plan. Just over 6 months ago, I was on my honeymoon with my wife, and we were in Las Vegas, and it was amazing. We were surrounded by just the absolute chaos and insanity that goes on in Las Vegas. In and out of different hotels, and catching an awesome show, and just really, really amazing experience. And 2 days into my honeymoon, I received a phone call from my sister, and the words that she said to me were just, "We lost Joe." Joe is one of my two older brothers, and at the time that this happened 6 months ago, he was 53 years old. It was completely and totally unexpected, and it was due to a heart failure coming out of a routine surgery on his shoulder. And he was put under general anesthesia, and coming out of that general anesthesia, his heart could not take bringing his system back, essentially, and it failed, and they tried to revive him for about an hour, at which point he was gone. That it happened at all was incredibly shocking, obviously. That it happened on 2 days into my honeymoon, when I was as high as could be and having an amazing time, was really that was a kick. That was a kick in the whatevers. We had to stay there for an additional 2 days, and that was a rough 2 days to spend in Las Vegas. And then came home, turned around, and made the long drive from northern New Hampshire to southern New Jersey to be with my family. When I arrived, we had talked about just the service that we were going to have and everything else. And a few people basically said that, you're the one that needs to write the eulogy. Now, that kind of thing is a huge responsibility, because I would be in front of all of my family, obviously, and extended family, and many of my brother's friends. Now, he was 10 years my senior, so at the time this happened, 53 years old. I was 43 years old. And so, I knew a lot of his friends, but also there were a lot just from his work life and everything else, and I had no idea who these people were, and a lot of them were going to be there. So trying to honor somebody when you have a singular perspective of their life is very difficult, because I didn't know what he was like too much, at least in work and everything else. I knew my brother very well, obviously. We grew up together, but it was a very difficult thing to wrap my head around, is how do I write this so it's for everybody? The answer that I came up with was, it's not for everybody. I have a unique perspective on my relationship with my brother, and so this was going to be my moment to honor him my way, and with that unique perspective, and let people come in, and people that didn't know him as well as I did, and let them into my world and show them what he was like through his little brother's eyes. This is very difficult. So how do you write a eulogy? I didn't know. There's no roadmap. And just like grieving in general, I think it's very individual for every single person, and there's no right way or wrong way to do it. Somebody's not going to come to your house if you're grieving the death of a loved one and say, "Hey, you're doing it wrong," right? They're not going to be like, "No, don't cry that way. Cry this way. It's way better." There is no right or wrong way. You experience it the way you do, and everybody handles things differently, and experiences it through their own eyes differently, and feels very differently from one to the next. My process was like this. I sat down in front of my iPad with my keyboard at a Starbucks because I wanted to be somewhere where people coming in and out were not a distraction. It was just noise in the background. And I really didn't care about strangers coming in and out of a Starbucks. I was sitting there with a peppermint mocha and a stack of Starbucks napkins to wipe my eyes with. And I just set to the task of trying to frame what I needed to say. I put on some music. One of the things that my brother and I, he was a big fan of the band Yes, English progressive rock band, and he would always be listening to them, and I listened to them, and I came to love them too. And so I put my noise canceling headphones on, and just to block out any kind of distraction, and set a giant playlist going of Yes songs. And that helped me feel a little connected to him at the time. And that's how I went about crafting the words and redoing the words and writing everything down the way I needed to write it down. Delivering the eulogy in front of a great many people was a different experience entirely, because at that point, you're up front and you have to say the words that you've written. And I had read it over and over again, and I was prepared to speak it the way I needed to, and to just take my time with it. And I think that was most important, because at that moment, everybody is grieving, and they're all looking at you, and you basically have to just put your arms around everybody and say, okay, look, we're all here. There's no dancing around the subject. My brother is laying in state in a casket right in front of us, just a few feet away, for crying out loud. So, let's just go ahead and let's speak this and talk through it and go from there. Today is August 14th. I delivered my brother's eulogy on February 16th, so 2 days away from that anniversary. It took a good 5 trips or so to Starbucks over the course of an entire week. Trying to write and choke some words out, and eventually it was there, and I polished it, and I looked over it, and I spoke it to myself, read it aloud, just to make sure that it was right. So I'm going to violate one of my own YouTube rules, which is no video over 10 minutes long. This one is going to run long, and what I thought was that I would share my brother's eulogy with you. So if you know somebody that is grieving, if you know somebody that is suffering through the loss of a loved one, please feel free to share this. If you have to write a eulogy, or somebody that does, certainly, share my story and share what I'm writing with them, because it may help. If there's one thing that I learned from my brother's passing, is that life is very short indeed, and it can be over in a blink. And so we don't really have time to delicately dance around things that are inevitably you're going to have to face in your life. This full eulogy is posted on my blog, and so it's been available and out there, and a few people that I know watch this channel. You've already read it or seen it, or something along those lines, but this is only going to be the second time that I'm actually reading it for anybody. So thank you, and if you've stuck around this far, thanks, and I appreciate it. It's just a way for me to honor my brother, and I'm going to do my best. Good morning. Thank you all for being here as friends, family, and as people who were touched in some way by my big brother. I'm going to do the best that I can, but I may need to pause from time to time. Please forgive me if I need a break. I promise I'll get back on track very quickly. This is, after all, an overwhelming moment, and I feel as if though I've not yet had my moment to truly grieve for my brother. It may show up within the next 15 minutes. The first thing I want to say to you is this: it is okay to laugh on a day like this. There's no doubt in my mind that my brother would want light hearts on a heavy day. He would want to hear you laugh, because being amongst joyous people is what brought him the most happiness. He was the type to crack the right joke at the right time to get everyone smiling again. if even just for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, my brother Joe is standing beside me this morning, with my grandfather beside him and my grandmother serving up a big batch of their favorite food. He'd want us to mourn by celebrating him, and so that's the goal. I spent a long, exhausting week thinking about this moment and what I could possibly say that could honor every aspect of my brother Joe's life. Unfortunately, I can't. What I can do is give you a picture of the man through my eyes, through my own life, who he was as my brother, how I saw him with everyone that he touched. I have many stories about him, some of which are super inappropriate for eulogy or church. If you want to hear those, we can talk. Joe is my hero, my friend, and my brother. So let me tell you about Joe the hero. Joe the hero showed up on weekends when he was in high school in a Cherokee Chiefs uniform amidst the excitement of game day. He was a football player. I remember watching the marching band come down and his team run out on the field, and I couldn't wait to get a glimpse of him. I remember it like it was yesterday, running up to the fence that was around the field. I was about 6 years old and waiting for a very specific moment, and it was my favorite moment of the day. My brother would run out with his team. They'd be together, awash in excitement, pumping themselves up for the game. They did this thing where they did it like pad, pad, clap. And I would do it with them as a 6-year-old there watching. After they broke, he would, just before kickoff, walk to one end of the field in total solitude. And he'd take off his helmet, take a knee, lower his head, and pray. I'd be 20 yards away watching him through a chain link fence. And in that moment, he wasn't my brother. He was a superhero. Invincible. My brother was Captain America. And every weekend, I was in awe of him. I don't know if he was praying for safety, or praying for a win, or praying for touchdowns. I really don't. All I know is that he knelt there in his pads and his head down, and he was having his own private conversation with God, and he was my hero. Knowing my brother so well, I wouldn't be surprised if the first people he prayed for were his teammates, then his opponents, and then himself. Joe often put others first, and sometimes to a fault, but it's how he was wired, and the world would be a better place, I think, if more people followed his example. And when he played, he was fearless. As his little brother, I didn't care what the score was, or what he did in the game, or who won. Just him being out there was enough for me to idolize him. And that never changed. Ever. He remains my hero to this very moment, and he will until the day I am gone. Joseph is my hero for eternity. So let me switch gears and tell you about Joe as my friend. Friends keep secrets. And there's a secret that he and I kept our entire lives that I thought I would spill now during this eulogy, as I'm the only one left that's here to tell it. When I was a teenager, weekends at home typically involved my mom going to church, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. And at the time of these events, Joe was in his 20s, and I was in my teens, and a lot of times my mom would go to church earlier, and neither of us wanted to get up. Joe spent a week working himself to exhaustion, sometimes pulling 70 or 80-hour work shifts, and all he wanted to do was sleep in and relax on the weekends. So my mom would talk to Joe and say, look, be sure you go to church today and take your little brother. So we'd get up, and we were cranky, and we'd sit in his car, and he'd look at me. We were in the driveway of the house, and he'd look at me, and he'd say, do you want to go to church, or do you want to go to McDonald's? I was a teenager. Of course I wanted to go to McDonald's. So we'd sit there eating in his car in the McDonald's parking lot, scarfing down Big Macs and fries, and he'd get me a strawberry shake. We'd be listening to Van Halen and talking and being together and just bonding in our own way. So he knew that we couldn't get home in exactly 1 hour, because obviously it takes time to filter out of church and all that. So we waited a few minutes past, and then he'd swing by the church, and he'd hit me on the shoulder, and he'd say, David, go in there and grab the bulletin, the newsletter, so we can bring it back to Mom so she doesn't think we were just sitting at McDonald's. When we got home, Mom would ask if we went to church. And it was like, yes, here's the bulletin, newsletter. We went to church. I was physically in the church at one point in time. Here's the bulletin. Here's our proof. There's a pie sale, by the way. She'd ask the priest, she'd ask us, like, what did the priest talk about? And we'd be like, God stuff. I realize that right now we are in a holy space, but I also know you all understand what I am about to say. That right now, at this very moment, I wish he and I were at McDonald's, having strawberry shakes together and listening to some music. I'd give anything to have one more hour at McDonald's with him, sitting in his car and being brothers again. I'd take him now, but it would be super awkward. Joe would have loved that joke. It's true. Now about Joe, my brother. Family was something Joe honored. There were stretches of weeks where we didn't speak, and usually it was because he was keeping himself so busy. Hustling through life, he worked himself to the bone. He was tireless and so focused, but if you called him, told him you were in town to visit, he would drop everything just to see you or talk to you, and that was his way. That was something so special about him. No matter what you needed, to see him, to talk with him, advice, share a joke, talk about a problem, he made you feel like you were the center of his universe for those moments. If you asked, his full and undivided attention was yours, and it felt like love, because it was. And no matter what choices you made, or what trouble you were in, Joe would lend his ear to you. Without judgment, without anger, well, maybe a little judgment. Frustration, yes. Passion, yes, but only because he wanted you to be the very best version of yourself. At this point, I'd like to say a few words to some specific people. My mom and dad. Losing a son is an unimaginable event. No parent wants to survive their children, and everyone here knows your hearts are broken. There are no words of consolation that anyone can offer that can heal you. But there is still love in the world, from your family and from all the people that Joe touched in his life. It won't heal you, but please take some solace that you're not alone. We all still need you, and more than ever you need us, and we are all here for you. My sister, Doris, and my brother, Dennis. Our brother is gone, and our circle is smaller. That has to draw us closer together. Let's agree to remember our time with him with the fondness he would have wanted. Let's make every effort to get back to laughing again, with that same hysterical abandon as when our brother was with us. He would want us to find that joy together in his absence. To Joe's children, Ryan, Justin, Alexis, and Matthew. This is perhaps the hardest of all, because you have to grow up a little faster. I spoke to your dad frequently, and whenever he talked about any of you, there was only ever one thing in his heart that he communicated to me. He loved you, and he was never anything short of the proudest man on earth at what each of you were becoming. Ryan, your father beamed when he spoke of you maturing, making a life for yourself, being independent, and so focused on doing what you wanted to do. I have no doubt that his strong work ethic and sense of responsibility was his greatest gift to you. Your dad would want you to have everything you ever worked for, and he would want you to be proud of yourself, as proud as your entire family is of you. And I believe it is now up to you to be the rock for your family, as he was for yours, and I know you can do it. Justin, whether it was hockey or bodybuilding, your father spoke of you with such pride, and he was willing to sacrifice so much because your dreams were so clear, and he wanted you to have every single one fulfilled. It was clear in every conversation I ever had with him that you inspired him. Take heart. Your father raised you to be a good man, and your father gifted you his incredible determination to follow your dreams without fear, doubt, or hesitation. Honor him by grieving, getting past the pain, and achieving the great things that we all know you're capable of. Sweet Alexis, Daddy's little girl. When I spoke to your father about you, it was pure unconditional love. You had such a grip on his huge heart, and he was so proud of your independence. And when he spoke of you growing up and growing into a woman and going to college, he still spoke of you as his little girl. I know how difficult this has been for you, and I believe your father's greatest gift to you was his capacity to stick to his principles, be fearlessly independent, yet still offer complete and unconditional love to those around you. It's a gift you need to carry on, because whenever we hug you, it helps us all feel close and connected with him once more. And Matthew, my little man, you were Dad's best friend, his little buddy, his partner in crime. As your dad got older and slowed down a little from his football days and his bustling 80-hour work weeks, you brought an incredible amount of light, love, and joy into his heart. Watching you two together was like watching a movie. Two best friends being crazy, laughing like mad, and getting into some innocent trouble. Don't ever stop being that fun guy and that best friend. Your father's joyous personality shines through you every moment we're with you, and it's beautiful. In closing, I need to ask something from all of you. Be a fearless hero, like Joe was for me. Be a fearless friend, like Joe was for others. Be a proud teacher and mentor, like Joe was for his children. Be fearlessly joyous, like Joe was his entire life. And finally, be the first person to say I love you to those in your life who are important to you. Thank you all for being here.